So without any further ado, let's get into this. We have a packed agenda for the session. We'll spend a moment talking about dataverse and the unified vision, then move on to talk about the two main patterns for reporting across Dynamics 365 data. One being Link to Fabric, also known as and referred to sometimes as Fabric Link, and the other Synapse Link. Then we'll talk about the transition paths before looking at a utility we've created, which is called Entity Util, and how customers can leverage this Entity Util to help assist them in moving from BYOD to Synapse Link or Fabric Link. Closing out the session on Synapse Link and Link to Fabric, we'll look at how these technologies could help save money. And in the end, I'll briefly touch upon one of our latest reporting tools, Business Performance Analytics. So let's first look at the vision of the future and what that looks like. For Microsoft, it is a case of leveraging and enhancing the powers of the dataverse and offering a truly unified experience. There are a number of programs underway to create this unified experience. Some have been available for years, such as Dual Write. Some are relatively new, and some are still coming. Today, we'll look at data and how, by understanding the data and its intent, Dataverse provides turnkey capabilities in a consistent manner over all of its data. No more will there be a variety of different tools and technologies to choose from. The Dataverse is not just a database or storage, it encompasses everything that is needed to build integrated applications, processes, and insights across the enterprise. This comes in many forms, from data storage to APIs and business logic and events, to reporting and analytics and AI, all the way through to security and compliance. And because it is a low-code data platform, developers can spend more time focusing on business needs through the configuration of the system and less time building infrastructure. So let's look at how data can be exported for analytical and reporting purposes. There have been various technologies available for exporting data from Dynamics 365 apps. These technologies have a long history, which you are all probably familiar with. So for the benefit of time, let's recap by saying that they were at the leading edge when they were made available. However, that was years ago. And since then, new and better technologies and architectures have become available. And thus, we're moving away from the old and looking towards the future. With that said, I am sure those using Export to Data Lake feature within Finance and Operations apps are aware that the deprecation was announced late last year, and the date is the 1st of November of this year. So going forward, there are two patterns that we want to focus on. The first is Fabric Link. Fabric Link offers a no-copy approach to accessing customers' data. This relies upon Microsoft OneLake, which we'll discuss shortly. Fabric Link enables a low-code makers and data analysts to securely work with their data. On top of that, Fabric can be used to create virtual entities across the data, and these virtual entities can be called from within the Power Platform to be leveraged by low-code users to do more with that data. The second pattern we will focus on is Synapse Link. This approach continuously exports data from a customer's Dynamics 365 app to a customer's data lake. Once that is hosted in your own Azure subscription, this architecture enables IT admins and data engineers to work with Azure Synapse and other tools to create analytics and reports. Both of these rely upon a new technology to determine the data that has changed. This new technology, row version change tracking, is very efficient And by simplifying the way changes are tracked and data can be exported, there is an upside as the impact to the operational workload is reduced. It is also worthwhile pointing out that because this is a different technology, it can run in parallel to existing technologies such as BYOD and export to data lake. Thus, customers can transition gradually, avoiding the risk of a big bang cutover. So I mentioned Microsoft OneLake. So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, and before looking at Fabric Link in greater detail, I just want to go over and explain a bit about Microsoft OneLake. Microsoft OneLake is a managed lake experience that is managed by Dataverse in Microsoft subscription, and it is known as the Microsoft OneLake. This means that Dataverse will create and deploy the lake and allow secure access to the lake. So when leveraging Fabric Link technology, the Delta Parquet formatted files will be stored in the Dataverse Microsoft OneLake. Many first-party apps will also leverage the Microsoft OneLake, such as Business Performance Analytics, which I'll talk about at the end of this presentation. I know many of you will be wondering about space and costs, and we'll look at those later in the presentation. Now, let's take a moment to reflect on what a typical legacy architecture might look like, and then we'll look at how Fabric Link, or Link to Fabric, can help simplify it. You'll notice that there are or were multiple different technologies available to export data from both finance and operations apps, as well as customer engagement apps. These push data into either a data lake as CSV files or into Azure SQL databases. From there, the data would typically be transformed and moved to other systems. For example, pipelines were created to move the data into third-party apps such as Snowflake, or it was made available in Azure Synapse serverless before being consumed by a presentation layer such as Power BI. It is worth remembering that BYOD has had an impact on some operational workloads, as the data has been materialized within the transactional database before being exported to BYOD. Of course, this is just focusing on Dynamics 365 apps. When you consider larger or enterprise companies with a multitude of apps, the landscape can move from a complex architecture to an extremely complex architecture. Adding to the complexity is a multitude of technologies, and all of this adds to high maintenance costs and an overall high end-to-end cost to get data from point A to the final presentation or consumption layer. So let's take a moment to see how Fabric Link, or Link to Fabric, can simplify the architecture. Firstly, we can see that the data is stored in the Microsoft OneLake. This can simplify the deployment, as a customer no longer needs to deploy their own data lake, or because most customers have multiple environments in which they want to test out various and build solutions, it's more likely that it will stop them needing to deploy multiple data lakes for all of those sandbox environments. It also simplifies the security, as the access is secured by the Dataverse. So we've simplified the deployment and we've simplified the security. Next, we'll see that the data can be accessed via shortcuts. These shortcuts allow Fabric to read the data without needing to move the data. However, using Fabric data flows, for example, the data can be moved to Fabric OneLake and transformed into a lakehouse, leveraging medallion architecture patterns for faster reads and enabling the data to be sanitized. Microsoft Fabric also combines separate tools into a single user experience, which helps to reduce the number of technologies that are required. All of this simplifies the architecture and helps to reduce the maintenance costs, which in turn help drive down the end-to-end costs. There is a link in the resources section of this presentation to a demo which takes you through the steps to enable Link to Fabric, and then how you can select a few tables to export data, and then from there, how you can leverage Fabric to create your first reports. So to recap, with Fabric Link, data will stay in the dataverse with secure access or dataverse governance boundaries. With secure access allowed from Fabric, customers do not need to deploy their own data lakes, and there is no impact on operational workloads. Due to the low-code nature, it is easier to upskill users, and by leveraging Fabric copilots, users can get work done faster. And of course, the ability to create virtual entities across the data allows low-code users to build new apps and drive actions using the Power Platform. The other pattern we are going to look at today is Synapse Link for Dataverse. In this pattern, data is continuously exported from Dynamics 365 apps via the Synapse Link pipeline to a customer's data lake. The data is exported as CSV files, and a Spark job is run to convert the CSV files into Delta Parquet formatted files. Each configured Synapse profile can have a different frequency specified in which the Spark job is triggered in order to convert those files into Delta Parquet formatted files. This frequency does not change how often the incremental data is exported to the CSV file, but rather how often that Spark job converts the files into Delta Lake formats. One thing to know is that customers can set up Synapse Link so that the CSV files are not converted into Delta Parquet formatted files. This is referred to as incremental CSV and closely resembles the export to data lake service. So let's take a moment quickly to reflect on that typical architecture again. Once more, you'll notice the different technologies to export data from Dynamics 365 apps. And to recap, this complexity can lead to higher maintenance costs and higher end-to-end costs for moving and transforming data from source to the eventual consumption or presentation layer. By using Synapse Link, this architecture is simplified. We are removing the multitude of technologies to export the data, and we are simplifying by converting the data into Delta Parquet formatted files. So while you can still export the data as CSV to support migration from export to data lake for finance and operations, we are confident that by converting to Delta Lake, customers will get a better performance and features which will lead them to adopt this approach. While with the data incrementally exported via Synapse Link and converted into Delta Lake formatted files by Spark jobs, we're simplifying the architecture and reducing the need to or habit of exporting multiple copies of the data. Once exported, the new format will enable faster querying processing and lower read costs because of the Delta format, and simplification as Databricks and Snowflake can work directly on the data lake. This will in turn reduce the maintenance costs as well as those end-to-end costs. You can take this architecture and further simplify it and reduce the need for data duplication and end-to-end costs with Microsoft Fabric and the use of shortcuts. You can leverage all the goodness of Fabric, but still have the data exported to your own data lake. And this is by using Fabric shortcuts to read the data. So to recap, if you are not ready to adopt Fabric, you can extend your current investments by leveraging Synapse Link to export the data from Dynamics 365 apps to a storage account in your own subscription. And then with minimal changes, you can continue using your downstream pipelines. The conversion to Delta Parquet formatted files in near real time offers a potential for faster querying and reduced storage costs as the files are compressed. If you're a Dynamics 365 customer engagement customer, you should have already moved off data export service. So for this presentation, we'll focus on the paths forward for finance and operations apps. Customers who might still be on BYOD or export to data lake. If you are a new customer and haven't gone live yet, you should be implementing the new patterns and avoiding BYOD and export to data lake. For export to data lake migration to Synapse Link, you're able to export the files in CSV, and we've published information on the audit columns, that are different between export to data lake and Synapse Link. And these are available, this information is all available on GitHub. Therefore, while there is a change to the folder structure, we believe that the changes necessary to the underlying pipelines will be relatively minor. Therefore, let's focus our attention onto BYOD, or more specifically, how you can create entity schemas the same as they are as exported to BYOD. So when it comes to BYOD, and for those of you who have very familiar with Dynamics 365 finance and operations, there's a concept called an entity. Entities such as customer v3, which are used a lot for importing and exporting of data. And these are used for exporting data to BYOD. And one of the most significant issues is that BYOD exports data in the materialized entity shape. However, Synapse Link exports data as tables or as simple entities. So simple entities are entities that conform to a set of rules which make them more efficient than complex entities, and we won't get into the details in this session. However, there's lots of information online if you are interested. So if you are exporting simple entities to your BYOD, the migration will be relatively simple, as they can be made visible and have change tracking enabled before exporting the data in the materialized entity shape via Synapse Link. However, for complex entities, it is more difficult. Therefore, the Fast Track team has collaborated and created a PowerShell tool, which we've called Entity Util, that is available on GitHub. This tool allows customers to identify the complex entities that they want to export. The tool will then read and document the entity structure in a JSON file and use this information to then create the views within the target environments. And it's these views that represent the complex entities so that you can reference the view instead of the table, thus minimizing the downstream impact or changes that may be needed in the downstream. And by view, I am referring to an SQL view. So that's when a number of tables are joined together and effectively a query that you can just execute, and it will return the data in that particular format. These views can be created in Fabric or in Azure SQL database or a serverless database, or even in the replica database created by Synapse Link. Just one note on that is that you cannot create it in the same DBO database schema. Thus, you have options. You can refactor your downstream systems to leverage the tables as they are exported directly via Synapse Link, or you can leverage Entity Util to help you recreate those complex views, those complex entities as views in your target systems. So one of the questions we are asked most often relates to the cost. Customers want to understand if this change is going to cost them more or save them money in the long term, thus helping them put forward a business justification for the effort required. So let's take a moment to consider how costs can be viewed. While it is difficult to give a general one-size-fits-all answer, when we look at the full end-to-end process, there are various areas that you can look at in more depth in order to start the cost comparison. And we will break down the end-to-end process and highlight where we believe customers and partners can start collecting that cost information to build a comparison. So the first area is that high maintenance cost for all the different tools being used to export data. With Synapse Link or Link to Fabric, these should be reduced. Next, you can look at the storage and compute costs for all the data that is being ingested. Then you can look at the compute costs for the transformation and data ingestion. There is also the cost for staging the data. And last but not least, there is the cost for the presentation layer. Keeping those key areas in mind, let's look at how these costs map when looking at Synapse Link architecture. Firstly, we can see that it is a simplified architecture, as I've mentioned, and as such should hopefully have a lower maintenance cost. You should save money on SQL compute, though there are costs associated with converting the files to Delta, and we'll look at some estimates shortly. Next, there should be lower transformation and integration costs as the data is already optimized in Delta Lake format. The staging costs are likely comparable. Likewise, the presentation costs are also likely comparable. As mentioned, let's look a bit more at the cost of converting data into Delta format. It is important to highlight that customers are only paying for the Spark jobs when the job is running. Therefore, if you are only running the jobs hourly, it will be less expensive than if you are running the job every 15 minutes. Another factor to consider is the size of the Spark pools. The small to medium are approximately half the price of the medium to large Spark pools. So when looking at the end-to-end costs, it's important to focus on the potential savings from the overall maintenance of the solution, as well as the potential for reduced storage and ingestion costs, leading to a lower transformation and integration costs. Now let's compare with Link to Fabric. So when customers enable Fabric Link, the data is stored in the dataverse security and governance boundary. The data, and again, as I mentioned, all of this, the data lake that is created, the Microsoft OneLake, is all created by the dataverse when you enable this capability. And that data is converted into Delta formatted files by Spark jobs. However, these jobs are managed by Microsoft. Thus, customers are charged by the dataverse capacity that is being used by the Delta files. However, it is important to remember that the design of the Delta files allows for a lot of compression. The factor is different between tables. However, we have seen some very large compression factors. And finally, there is the Fabric compute to read and transform data. So, as I mentioned earlier, Microsoft is also leveraging the capabilities of the Microsoft OneLake and the Synapse Link Fabric Link profiles in order to generate our own reports or first-party apps for our customers. And one of the first ones that's being made available is the Business Performance Analytics, or BPA as it's commonly referred to. So our Dynamics apps vision is based and focused on the 3 A's: AI, automation, and analytics. The key objective is through the collaboration of all applications that we offer, we connect processes, people, and data in every organization to provide the ability for our customers to adapt faster or rapidly innovate. When the BPA project began, the team identified 3 core principles that they wanted to be led by. We know how hard it is to create reports, especially analytical reports out of Dynamics 365 finance and operations apps. As such, one of the first core principles of BPA was to make the experience of using the tools and creating reports easy and as painless as possible for users. Obviously, customers need to trust the data, and so ensuring the data is correct, secured, and trustworthy has also been a core pillar. And finally, we wanted to learn from the past. So we wanted to make sure it was extensible, not only in the context of the schema of the models, but also enabling a mashup of data from external sources. So let's look at how BPA helps us achieve this. The approach was not only to focus on Dynamics 365 data, as mentioned, but also to allow usage of data from other systems and look at reporting from a value chains model perspective. The value chain is the grouping of business processes. This approach was selected as it aligns more closely with how specific users or roles within an organization would use the system. These should hopefully look familiar to you. The initial effort has been on the first 4 value chains. That is record to report, procure to pay, order to cash, and acquire to retire. However, the goal is to cover all value chains within Dynamics 365 finance and operations. On top of these value chains, we added a dimensional role-based security model to align the security of the data with the roles and the value chains. And then on top of all of that, we expose the presentation layer where users can leverage the out-of-the-box reports or create their own, and of course, leverage Copilot to get the most out of the data with the least amount of effort. So taking a moment to look into the data value chains associated with finance, which are the first data value chains that will be made available with BPA, we have, as mentioned, record to report. Here you can see we have from the top budget and forecasting through budget reservation all the way down to general ledger. Next, there is procure to pay, which starts at the top with purchase requisition and flows all the way through to prepayment. This is followed by order to cash, which begins with sales or service orders and goes through the value chain all the way to sales, payments, collections, and cash. Finally, there is acquire to retire. And we have followed the same pattern of following the data all the way from acquisition through to retirement or disposal. The really powerful part of this design is that you're not limited to just one part of the process. So, for example, in procure to pay, you aren't limited to just reporting on the purchase order process, which is represented by the box, but you can report all the way down and back up the data value chains. An even more powerful perspective is that you can report across the data value chains. So you could start with the general ledger entry for that purchase order and look across all of the data value chains and the associated data. So let's take a moment to look at the architecture for BPA. First, you'll see on the left that, as mentioned, the data is extracted from Dynamics 365 finance and operations apps. The data is exported using the same Synapse Link pipeline we previously spoke about, and data is written to the Microsoft OneLake. Next, there are Spark jobs. These jobs read and transform the data into the facts and dimensional models, and then this data is written back to the lake in this transformed state. Next, this data is moved into the embedded Power BI workspace. This is the load phase. The BPA app uses Power BI workspace and can access this data to produce the reports using Excel or embedded Power BI. So we recommend that if you haven't already, you install BPA and start exploring the reports and capabilities that are available out of the box and add all of this wonderful additional value. As mentioned, there are a ton of resources available, and we will share this deck afterwards. And so with that said, any questions? I can't hear anything.
No questions, Stephen, so far.
Oh,
but thanks for the session.
Great job. You know everything. Excellent.
This is the opportunity, guys. Stephen is here if you have any question.
Can you take the mic to... You can ask that.
Just unmute me. So what are the licensing implications, Stephen? That's the question.
For business performance analytics. So for business performance analytics, there will be the core product is available with your standard Dynamics 365 license. However, if there's in the future roadmap, when I was talking about extensibility and mashing up data and these sort of more advanced capabilities, there may be licensing implications down that path. However, those are still in development, so no decision has yet been made.
No question, then thank you, Stephen, for the session. It was really insightful. A lot of new things coming.
Well, everyone, enjoy the rest of
question.
the wonderful presentations and the networking and the drinks and nibbles. And hopefully next time I can get over there and do this face-to-face. But in the meantime, have a wonderful evening and thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephen. Neri, you have a question? Yeah.
Compared to the customer have to pay more than usual, but the long-term goal is reducing price. But I'm not sure how low is that long-term goal going to be.
So the question is around short-term and long-term price for this architecture. Neri, is that the question? Yeah. Any thoughts on return of investment on this platform, Stephen? I know you are not a licensing guy.
But so if we're talking about Synapse Link and Fabric Link, I think there's again there's no easy answer, unfortunately. It's a case of looking at what you're currently using and then trying to map it to the capabilities that are available from using Synapse Link or Fabric Link and determining what's the best technology and approach for you moving forward. It really depends on each organization, each company has its own architecture, so to speak, or architecture. And so I just can't give a blanket answer. I can only say, use these sort of pillars that I was talking about and understand where your money is currently going and how by moving towards these new capabilities, how that maps out and compares.
Thank you, Stephen.